Hello. Welcome to this afternoon's session. How can Labour win power? We're still talking about this. It's going to be good. We have, to my left, Amy Jackson, the Director of Executive Policy and Politics at Unite the Union. Paul Mason, journalist, filmmaker, author of a number of books, including his latest, How to Stop Fascism. And the one and only Jon Trickett, Labour MP for the constituency of Hemsworth, who didn't need an introduction, clearly. Okay, Amy, over to you. There is a stand-up mic, or there is this.
Oh, shall I just sit?
You can sit.
Yeah, it's a bit more relaxed, isn't it? So, hi everyone, I'm Amy Jackson, and my more simple job title is Political Director of Unite. And I used to be the Political Secretary to Jeremy Corbyn. So I am fully committed to a socialist Labour government. So there's a million things that Labour needs to do to win power, but I'm going to focus on 3 today. First things first, they need to stop attacking their own members. The suspensions, the auto-expulsions, the prescriptions, it's a complete distraction and it has to stop. I was absolutely cringing in the conference hall yesterday when I saw the CAC report and hearing their speeches calling these anti-democratic leadership rule changes, getting Labour election ready. It is shameful. It is disgraceful. And I cannot see how these changes make Labour any more election ready whatsoever. If they think that carving out the members is going to make them somehow election ready, then we are going to be out of power for a very long time. What Labour should be doing is taking a leaf out of Joe Biden's book, who, when he became the candidate, he actually brought the left with him. He understood that good leadership requires bringing people with you, not crushing anybody that happens to have a difference of opinion. And who knows, maybe if they did bring the left with them, we might have some good ideas to share. And that brings me on to the second thing, policy. Labour needs to have some policy, and it needs to be bold. The Labour Party is creating a myth that it was somehow the policy platform that we stood on in 2019 that lost us the election. But there is every indication that those policies are massively popular with the public. All of the polling on those policies shows that that is the case. But not only that, the Labour Together report, which was drawn up by all parts of the party, Lisa Nandy, Ed Miliband, they concluded that the only things that will hold our voter coalition together in the villages, the towns, the cities, across the different age groups is bold economic policy. That is the only thing that unites us. And we have to look at the facts here. This can't be about which, crushing the former leader or which faction is right. The only way we're going to win is looking at the facts. Labour's vote has been in decline since 1997, except there was one time when it went up again, and that was 2017. And we cannot pretend that that never happened. And I love Jeremy, I worked for Jeremy, but that was not about Jeremy the man. That was about Jeremy's politics. People wanted to hear it. And they felt that we had policies that were brave, that would actually make a difference to their lives and would solve some of the many problems that a lot of people are facing. So it's really, really important that instead of focusing on ourselves or being terrified to say anything brave about the massive problems that are facing us, we've got to start talking about the vast inequality of wealth and power that we have in this country and to have some answers as to how we're going to address it. I just had to say this as an aside. On that very point, we are facing an energy crisis. We have been told in Unite that around 40 energy companies are going to go bust. This is a huge, huge problem. And yet we have the Labour leadership on the telly saying now is not the time for nationalisation. If not now, when? The private sector has obviously failed. We were promised, when Keir came in, and when he stood for leader, we were promised Corbynism and competence. Some people, a lot of our members, believed that was going to happen, but sadly, we've ended up with neither. But Keir's way forward is actually quite straightforward. He actually came up with it himself in his 10 pledges. But rather than ditch them, he should use what won him power in the Labour Party to win him power in the country. Instead, he's now attacking the members that uphold the very policies that he stood on to be elected leader. So thirdly, Keir will never win if he doesn't properly support working people. We have in Unite 1.2 million members, and they all have one thing in common. They all pay membership fees to Unite to keep themselves protected in the workplace. But what they don't all do is vote Labour. And I'm going to share something with you that we haven't put out publicly before. We did a survey of our members, and we had around 28,000 respondents. Now, I'm giving you the raw data here. This is not weighted, so do keep that in mind. You know, these things are all, people are self-selected, and that causes, slight issues. But the fact is, our members were asked which party they would vote for if there was an election tomorrow, who they voted for in 2015, who they voted for in 2017, and who they voted for in 2019. In 2015, around 50% of our members voted Labour. In 2017 and 2019, around 48% voted Labour. They were asked who they would vote for if there was an election tomorrow, and it was 38%. That is a 10% drop amongst Unite members, who, by the way, we represent 19 different sectors across the economy. It is a huge cross-section of our society, and people who should be voting Labour. But the problem is the trust is broken. People will pay them... Oops, there goes my notes. Thank you. People are paying their fees because they know that Labour, that the union will protect them, but they don't believe that Labour does anymore, and we have to rebuild that trust. Unite welcomed the Employment Rights Green Paper that was worked on by Andy MacDonald and announced by Angela Rayner. But Labour need to do more. They have to not be afraid to take on big business. They have to not be afraid to call out greed and inequality. They have to not be afraid to stand with unions, not just by delivering policy papers, but by standing on picket lines with us, sticking up for us in the media, not taking us on to look like they are standing up to the unions who they're supposed to be representing. So we all want and need a Labour government. So I really beg Keir, stop attacking the left, come up with some big, bold policies and get behind working people. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Paul, you're up next. Did you want to use this?
No,
you're going to go here?
Okay. Partly because my notes are on my iPhone and I can't see them. I agree. The attack on democracy and on the members is not just disgraceful, it's just counterproductive. At the last election, I was delegated by Momentum to go and campaign for an MP called Richard Burden in Birmingham Northfield, where Longbridge used to be, for those of you my age. The door was slammed in our faces again and again by ex-Longbridge workers saying Jeremy Corbyn's going to destroy our lives. And all we were doing was reminding them to go and vote Tory in the end. It was a very rainy day. I don't know what it was like where you were, but it was a very rainy day. And from the moment of getting on the train at Euston Station, it was like when you used to go to a Northern Soul all-nighter. You could see, people you never knew, but you all knew you were going to the same place. And sure enough, we get to Richard Burden's constituency. He was at risk, and we lost. And loads of the people who'd been on the train and coaches, and tens of people had come from London and others from all over the place. I'll do it, but I'm not sure everybody else is going to do it. If they're told they're useless, they're told they're a bunch of trots, they're told that their votes don't matter, I'm not sure people will travel half the country for an MP who never basically did anything for them, and in particular for any MP who basically will back the attack on the members and on left policies. So that's the first reason. This is not like a threat. It's just a fact. Now, how can we win? I think I want to take a leaf out of the old Communist International textbook, which is you start from an analysis of the conjuncture. Where are we? What is happening? We might not like it, but let's start with where are we? I think there are two salient facts which were proved by 2019. Number one, the working class is divided. It's divided culturally, and that cultural divide is based on a different experience of exploitation. One of the easiest ways of understanding it is if you think about Keir and Lisa Nandy's constituencies. You know, if you get on a train in Euston and go to Wigan, 2 hours, it's less than 2 hours, you would have to be absolutely crazed and ignorant not to notice what the differences are. Camden is poorer than Wigan. And yet Camden poor people in Camden sit amid a kind of what I call the golden crumbs economy. You know, a bit of the golden crumb will fall from the golden cake, and if you're really lucky to be an Uber driver or a security guard, you can get the kind of job where you can just about scrape by. And you're never going to be bored in Camden. Let's face it, you're never going to be bored. Get off the train in Wigan, the street is dead. The only drinking places are stand-up drinking places. The only people drinking are young men, young working class men. It's like going to a men's club until a certain time when females come out. It's a very traditional society. There's no vibrant retail. You know, and Lisa tries to put a great face on it. You think always MPs talk about the best of their community, but the obvious thing, there's no students. And if you move the student department there from, say, Salford University, the students wouldn't want to go because there's no black people and there's no migrants. Now on the basis of that, we begin to understand in real terms, not sociological terms, real terms, why people in Wigan are so pissed off that they nearly voted Tory. And in the town I come from, next to Wigan, they flipped from being 100 years of liberalism, 100 years of Labourism, to the first time ever of the most rancid, racist Tory government. They were happy. They were queuing at the doors of the voting booths at 7 a.m. or whenever it opens to vote against us. Now, the number one thing about getting into power is we have to find a way of uniting the class around something they can agree on. And you are right, Amy. The only thing that many of the people can agree on, it's certainly not going to be Brexit, certainly not going to be migration, it's not going to be possibly even Green New Deal. The only thing they can agree on is that they want their lives to get better through investment. I think the other thing I've observed, I don't know about other people, is that their perception of unfairness and inequality is very focused on them and not how we think about it, which we'll say, look at a hedge fund guy. And I've met them, I've worked with them. Hedge fund guys who collect Stradivarius violins. We know what the other end of inequality looks like. But most people in Wigan and Leigh, where I come from, don't know what it is. So when we talk about inequality, the first inequality they think about is between them and an Afghan taxi driver. And so we've got to find a way, we've got to find powerful and clear messages, and there's no messages without an offer. This is why the pledge rollback is such a disgrace. The pledges, at least, which we worked on in Keir's campaign, were there to hold him to a thing. Because you can only win that argument with those workers who we're losing through pledges. So that's the first thing. I think we have to recognise that. No, we mustn't over-dramatise it. Perhaps I over-dramatised it by choosing the extremes. But we must understand that the life experience of the working class is no different. And people my age and John's age can remember when, despite the fact that there were, people marched for Enoch Powell and the rest of it, the life experience was generally the same. Right, number one. Number two, the progressive section of the population has fragmented politically. We might not like that. If you go to Stroud, I went to Stroud and I begged on the eve of that election, begged a room as big as this, full of Green and Labour Party people, to just vote tactically for Labour. But they weren't having it, because Molly Scott-Cato is an MEP, and she thinks she can be an MP. And they, I think they're between 3,000 and 5,000 very progressive, Green New Deal, very progressive on everything, people would rather have their 3,000 votes recorded for a Green than have a very good left-wing Labour MP. So what can we do about that? We can recognise it and we can work around it to build alliances, as we're going to have to do, above all in Scotland. Now, what should we build the alliances around? I want to say, first of all, my chosen route to this alliance is that the party itself becomes that alliance. This is why, to some people's evident and understandable frustration, I've tried to work with Starmer and the people around him, because I thought, and I still think, that there's no other route to power than some right-wing Labour MPs are going to be in the shadow cabinet. But right-wing Labour MPs are going to be a shadow cabinet, and so are left. The injustice at the moment is there's no left-wing MPs, and the left's agenda is being trampled. But unless we create the party as the alliance, there's only one other alternative, and that is we create the party as a fairly homogeneous thing, and we make a political alliance overtly with other people outside it. I can't see any other route to power given first past the post. Another thing, we're in an age of personality. Mandelson and me were on a panel 2 weeks ago, and people say, what are you going to do about the fact that, Johnson's got a personality and Keir hasn't? And Mandelson didn't contradict it. He said, well, Keir's got a character. And I can see he's right. Keir Starmer, whatever you think about him, is a straightforward and compassionate. No, he is a straightforward and compassionate person. Well, if you don't think so, don't bother voting for him then? If you think that Starmer and Johnson are the same kinds of people, you're deluded, okay? However, what I was going to say is, personality does matter. And we need a new generation of MPs. If you look here, who's getting mobbed by general members of the public, it's not Starmer. Yeah? Who is it? It's Zara Sultana.
Guys, let him speak. You'll get a chance to comment later,
It's Zara
please.
Sultana. It's Nadia Whittome. It's Clive Lewis. It's John. It's Jeremy. We need those MPs to be able to, for more of those MPs to come through. Okay, so that's what we need. That's another thing. The final thing is, the opportunity is very, very limited. It's limited by the fact that the right now controls the party and they control the policy agenda. But if you look at what's just happened, it shows you where, if we place pressure, we can achieve things. Rachel Reeves just announced $28 billion a year for what she won't call Green New Deal, but it is Green New Deal. Now, $28 billion a year over 8 years is 25 billion short of what John Mack pledged. So it's not enough. And it won't, in any case, John Mack wouldn't have got to zero net carbon. But it's more than what she would have done had she not been terrified of the fact that people are voting Green, people are voting SNP, people are voting Lib Dem. And what's the final thing? I'll finish on this. Again, speaking as an old-timer, in the 70s, the ruling class more or less begged the Labour Party to take power, if you remember. With a 3-day week, with the lights had gone off, the miners were on strike, it was either that or a military coup. They will beg us to take power if there's a mass movement of resistance to them. And where that mass movement of resistance can come from is not the circumstances are building for it. Because if instead of going to their individual bosses, the HGV drivers and the Amazon drivers and the petrol tanker drivers didn't go individually and say, thanks very much, I'm now on 50K, if they went collectively with the Uber drivers and everybody else and said, we all drivers are in short supply, we all want a national deal that makes driving lucrative, humane and well remunerated, and we're represented by you or other trade unions, that would change things. And I'll tell you, if we did that year in, year out, they'd beg us for a Labour government, because the thing they fear most is the uncontrolled power of the working class. And sadly, our 100-year history is that we've been the party that controls the power of the working class. So that's my route to power: mass resistance and understanding the need for a radical proposal to bring together the different sections of the class.
Thanks, Paul. Oh,
sorry.
I thought I'd have one in case I had to manhandle the mic off people.
Okay, well, I represent one of those communities that Paul was just speaking about. By the way, it's good to be on the same platform. And Amy, what a brilliant person, what a brilliant role you played. Every single meeting with Jeremy and the inner team, Amy was there, really strong, determined, a fighter for our class and for socialism. And I pay tribute to her, the work she did under Jeremy and the work she's now doing for such a mighty, radical, progressive union. Amy, it's brilliant to be on the platform with you too. All right, okay. Let me also just say to those who haven't seen him yet, our brilliant chair, Ian Lavery, is in the audience. For me, he will always be our chair, the chair of the left movement, which was beginning to build a different kind of society and which we can go on to do. Look, I represent 23 former mining villages in the heart of Yorkshire. I think I come from the heart of England. And I heard what Paul said about communities in the north of England. I'm not going to speak for them. I'm going to let a woman speak for herself. She sent me an email 3 hours ago. Because I don't find racism ingrained. I find despair ingrained and a willingness to fight back, to get behind a leadership which would fight. But I also get the impression of people saying to me, I don't want a Labour Party that's like a chocolate fireguard that melts as soon as you put the fire on. They want a fighting Labour Party. Let me let her speak for herself. She says, I joined the party, and I got this 2 hours ago by chance, because I believe that we could have a fairer society, greener society, less divided communities. That's why I joined the Labour Party, and I wanted to support that. I don't now see a party that represents me, a working class woman who is in poverty. I can't make ends meet, she says. We rely on handouts in our family, and we're going to get poorer under the Tories. I don't see Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party sticking it to them, sticking up for us. I haven't seen an effective opposition, she says, in Parliament, especially during PMQs. And then she says something which is slightly heartrending, but I think she's right. Marcus Rashford has done more for my family than Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party. Not my words, hers. And she's speaking for many people I encounter at the co-op at the end of our street and in the rest of the communities I represent. There is a hunger for change out there. But if anybody still believed that Keir Starmer was going to lead a movement for change of the kind this country needs up to the beginning of this conference, we now know those people with those illusions need to abandon them, because what we've seen... What we've seen is a series of retreats. We already heard about the divisions which the leadership has created in our movement, where we should be trying to unify. But let me just take one issue. Amy's already mentioned it. The energy sector. Now, if ever there was an area which required radical policies, it's energy. Our planet's burning, and you cannot address the needs of our planet without some form of common or public ownership of the energy industry as a whole. Now, that is Labour Party policy. It was in the manifesto, which hasn't yet been abandoned as far as I can see, though we're well down the track of abandoning parts of it. And the Labour Party conference this weekend passed the Green New Deal with common ownership right at its core. You cannot deliver the changes we need Never mind dealing with fuel poverty and the situation facing so many workers in the industry without common ownership. It's not possible. But what did we see? We saw Keir Starmer that morning abandoning his own personal pledge for public ownership, and then after the conference, we saw the Shadow Chancellor saying there's something similar. Well, look, I stand by Labour Party policy, and that is what we should all know. Our policy is not decided by our leader, it's decided by our movement. And so let me just very quickly then come to where I think we are, because what I think we have is a leadership which is trying the old trick of presenting itself as though it believes in social democracy, the idea that you need to transform or even to end capitalist society in the interest of working people. That is the central idea of the Labour movement, this transformative idea in the interest of working people, or you see social democracy fall away into a form of revisionism, which abandons the idea that we're here there to represent and promote the interests of working people, but instead bows the knee to the power of capital and wealth. That revisionism is right at the core of the Keir Starmer project. I'm sorry to say that, because he has the same party card in his pocket as I have in mine. I want to see a Labour Prime Minister sooner than later. But the fact is, we will not go down that track if we continue with this revisionist policy. So what's necessary? I think there are two, and I'm going to be very, very brief now, two separate processes. One is we need to make the argument that the kind of society which we inhabit is a fundamentally divided society where the cleavage is along the lines of class, not geography, where there are 33 million people who work for a living in our country. And of course, there are differences. I'll come to that in a second. The first thing is, if we want to transform our country and deliver for working people, we need a set of policies which understand that that's a fundamental cleavage. Whatever you buy in the need to capital, you are not dealing with the needs of working people. Now, we know that as well as that cleavage, there are other cleavages, whether it's sexuality, race, gender, and all the other issues which matter to us. All of those need to be part of our perspective too. We have to recognize this heterogeneous society, but class divisions lie at the heart of what's wrong with our society. That's my first point. Win the argument, develop analysis, win the argument, and secondly, then build a movement on the back of your analysis. And building a movement means understanding that the fight for social justice never was won purely in the House of Commons. That if you mess around, tinker around with the system, and even proposing progressive alliances or changes to the voting system, all of those may be necessary, but they are not going to deliver the kind of movement which is needed to build a radical, transformative government. And so building a movement is our second task, winning the argument and building the movement. But the movement cannot be command and control, top down. We tell you what to think, we change your policy even though you voted for it 2 hours ago. That is not going to work. We need a horizontal, a lateral, a network movement. And we need to understand that the movement which we build will be inside and outside. Inside Parliament and outside Parliament. Inside the trade unions, inside the other community movements which we see up and down our country, the kind which Momentum represents, a new kind of movement for change. And only when we've created the conditions where there's a majority of people who understands our analysis and it comes into contact with our movement, can we really expect a radical Labour government to deliver on its promise? Now let me just finish then with this thought, because I've always felt that there was a red thread which runs through our movement, throughout all of its history. The people who established our movement back in the 18th, 19th century, as it began to develop, many of them understood that you cannot compromise with capitalism, with the powers of capital. They understood that you needed fundamental and radical change. And that thread began as a very small thread. From time to time in our history, it grew into a great wide tapestry, an inspiring movement, as the one which Jeremy built. But there were other times too when that movement developed in that way, and it will again, and it can again. But there were other times when that thread was down to a single fine filament, stretched taut to the point where it might break. But it never did, because of people like you. And I am determined, while I've got power in my body, that we will continue to maintain that red thread and build it back into a wide movement as it is. So here's my very final point. Think about this conference this weekend. The leadership attempted to bring a series of attacks on the left. But the Jeremy Coalition, the radical trade unions, the movement, Momentum, left MPs, the trade unions I mentioned, all of those came together at this conference, and we were not defeated. The central proposal to change the way in which the leadership was elected was defeated. So that red thread is not just a single thread, a single filament. We are still alive, we're still fighting. Comrades, we can still win this, but let's stick together. And anybody who thinks about leaving our movement, I say this to them. Did the Tolpuddle martyrs, who were threatened with being sent off to Australia, pack it in the first time there were signs of defeat? Or the Chartists? Or think about the suffragettes? No. Every time they were attacked, they came back stronger. And that's what we must do, comrades. We are not defeated. We can win this. In the end, we will. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jon. Amy, did you want to come back now before we go to questions?
Thanks. I just wanted to say a couple of things. First, to my good friends and comrades Ian Lavery and Jon Trickett. They have the incredible brains, politics, experience, and instinct. And the fact that Keir Starmer did not recognise this and didn't keep them in his shadow cabinet is an absolute disgrace. And the only person who loses out is him. The second thing I just wanted to quickly develop was the point that Paul made. So Rachel Reeves, I just sat through her 45-minute speech. She did promise to spend an extra 28 billion on green investment. She said she'll be the first green chancellor. But 28 billion, a promise of 28 billion a year, doesn't mean anything to most people. I don't understand really what 28 billion pounds is. It's such a huge number. It's incomprehensible. And you hit the nail on the head. Sorry, dry throat. You hit the nail on the head. She didn't say Green New Deal, but she did promise to spend the extra 28 billion. Meanwhile, you have Boris Johnson, who, after they won that by-election in Hartlepool, was up in Hartlepool saying things like green industrial revolution, massive investment, regional inequality, levelling up. And we have a front bench, we have a green chancellor or shadow chancellor who is too timid to say Green New Deal, even though it was overwhelmingly passed by the conference the day before. That is the problem.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to open up to the floor. I really, really want to encourage as many women to put their hands up as possible. About a few years ago, I chaired the first event I ever did, and it was actually with Ian Lavery and Dave Ward. And I was absolutely terrified, but this is what TWT is all about. It's about getting us up and talking comradely, keep it kind. I am going to choose a woman first. So there is a lady, 1, 2, 3, 4, and right at the back, please, on this side. And then we have a man here in a blue jumper and in the black at the back with the specs.
Hello, I've got 2 questions aimed mainly at Paul, for whom I've had much respect in the past for his work. The 2 questions I want to raise. You talked about the disillusioned and the poor in the Red Wall, saying they need investment and jobs, so they therefore voted Tory. But the 2017-19 manifesto offered precisely those things. But it was sabotaged by Labour HQ. There was a virtual blackout by the media. And so did those voters actually know that the manifesto offered investment, apprenticeships, quality jobs, and so on? Big question mark. Secondly, you talked about Keir being honest, straightforward, and so on. But he lied about the source of his backers before he was elected. He has ignored the manifesto and the Green New Deal, on which he was elected. So even if you have some loyalty for Starmer, and some of my friends voted for him, not realising he would not be the leader of unity, I do wish that you would, reflect a bit more accurately what has actually happened.
The lady in the blue and white top.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you if you realise just how angry people are at the moment. We've been treated so badly by this Labour Party. We've been isolated and shut down and silenced. I stood for election as a district councillor under Corbyn, and I've stood down today because I'm being shut down all the time and not given a voice. People are really angry and they want a chance to tell the country how angry they are.
Thank you. Well, this is all about how Labour can win power. And I put it to you, the panel, that a heart attack brought us Harold Wilson, who won 4 elections out of 5. Another heart attack brought us Tony Blair, who won 3 elections out of 3. So, are you thinking what I'm thinking?
This is another question probably aimed at Paul, particularly. You mentioned division in working class communities, and I just wonder if you want to apologise for your own role in pushing a people's vote that basically told people in those communities that they were stupid. Can I also ask you to apologise for your role in getting Keir Starmer elected as leader of the Labour Party, because he's an absolute disaster.
No, I'm really proud of my position on people's vote. I'm really proud of it, and I'm also proud that Labour Conference backed it. If you think about it, we were here 2 years ago, and Labour Conference, if you remember, was a debate between second referendum without a position and second referendum with a position for Remain, which was my position, and the other position won, and that's what went into the election, and I'm quite pleased with that. Now, to your question, comrade, about did people know? I'm sorry to say, this is what the problem is. Yes, it's partly for 9/10 of it is the media. The other part of it is networked fascism, basically. If you look at a place like Merthyr Tydfil, it's got a 17,000 strong Facebook group, which our members can't join, that's all about slagging off Labour. And in a normal time, it's saying the rates are too high and there's not enough parking. But every so often it accuses us of being Jimmy Savile, paedophiles, all the rest of it, the whole Rotherham stuff. So we need a proletarian, a plebeian politics that takes that on, that goes into those communities and is in those communities and fights back. Another example, Emma Hardy MP was telling me she won in Hull, but it was hard won, and probably only because the Brexit Party stood against the Tories. And what was happening there? Every time we said free broadband, every time we said, National Care Service, what was happening was not just coming from the Tories, it was coming from the grassroots. Fuck this free stuff. They'll be offering us free weed next. And unfortunately, that is the world of plebeian politics. And if you want to ask me what a list of things that frustrate me about Starmer, is that, and the front bench, is that they don't know how to do that plebeian politics, because they've all abjured from their university days on anything like a left populism, which what the thing that drew me to what Jeremy was doing was that. I mean, there was one of the, look, I'm not going to joke about hearts because I've got one myself and a load of metalwork in it as well. But the thing is, the serious question about can Keir survive? I think that's a serious question, and I've just been on TV talking about it. Look, if he doesn't pull something off at this conference, then it won't be just us on the left who'll be saying, let's think about somebody else. It will be the right as well, because they want to win power. Let's face it, they are obsessed with power. That's all they're in it for. And he has to come up with concrete pledges, concrete policies, respect the members, and someone who's supported might say, and stick to the deal he signed, which is the 10 pledges and having the left in the shadow cabinet. And if he doesn't do that, I just don't see him being able to clinch exactly with our members like this and your constituent who wrote to you. They can see the problem with him. And it's up to him. Nothing I can do can make him change. But, the pressure we're putting on here, and I'll shut up now, but John is absolutely right about the movement. The Labour, why does the ruling elite fear the Labour movement? Because it's a machine for channeling working class anger into the British state. It always has been. And under Jeremy, it was a very efficient machine. And now it's an inefficient machine, but they're still frightened of it. And I think they're more frightened of you as a member of the party than they will be of you just out on the streets doing stuff.
Any other comments?
Oh, I can do this.
Yep.
Look, I tend to agree with what Paul just said about a working class movement. That's what we need to build. And I think there's a number of ways where it has to start. First of all, the analysis I've just described has got to be right. We've got to stand on behalf of those people. We've got to, first of all, understand the conditions which people are being left to live in. They've been abandoned by a society which is working for a few hundred people, maybe 1,000. And so many communities have been abandoned. We call it held back. We don't say they've been left behind. They've been deliberately held back by a community, an economy, a society, a politics which doesn't want to see them having a voice. So all of that's important. But let me just make two quick proposals which we put in our no holding back document. The first is, the Labour Party has almost abandoned the estates. And I'm not going to say names, but a former neighbour of mine, an MP, would not go knocking on the estates during the election, which she then lost. Why? Because she'd taken a position on Europe which was unsustainable in those communities. And she simply walked away. She was sending the poor bloody infantry to knock on those doors while she went and knocked on what we call the posh doors further down the street. Now, the idea that we've abandoned people is very deeply ingrained. So my first proposal is this. Our first proposal is this. We need community organising on the estates. And so my commitment to community organising goes back to Ed Miliband days. We brought over a man called Arnie Graf. Some of you will know of him or heard of him. He was an American organiser. He'd helped in the civil rights movement, and then he was organising in the same city where, if you watched it, The Wire took place. We brought him over, and he was there to organise. But what happened? The powers that be at that time, not Ed, had him removed, sent back to America. The community organising was dropped, though I saw it, and it was brilliant. We saw it in Lancashire and elsewhere. And instead, the party was instructed to make 5 million phone calls. Think about it. Because people don't necessarily want to receive a sales call from any organisation, or including the Labour Party. 5 million sales calls. And I'm aware of comrades and friends of mine who were in marginal seats who said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be on the streets, speaking in the mosques, in the churches, in the community centres, identifying community leaders. I'm not going to be making part of these 5 million phone calls. What did they do? They didn't say, well done, John. Although he won the seat, actually, in the end. What they said was, that's it, no more money from the centre. Now, that sort of top-down command and control, 5 million phone calls in the last 3 weeks, is not what this Labour movement can be about. We've got to build and dig in from day one, especially in those communities like the ones I represent that have been left behind, or we say held back. And the second thing is the kind of people who become MPs, who sound and dress and look as if they've just come out of an Oxbridge seminar. Not that I'm against people who went to Oxbridge. Some people may say, why not? But who are change makers in their own communities. I want to see working class MPs. Look, there were, I think, 41% in 79 of MPs who came from a manual worker background. Now there's me and Lavery, I think 3 others. I'm a plumber. The extinguishment of working class MPs in the Labour Party is a serious problem, because the people want to know that we've got the best minds in Britain, but also have had experiences like we have, ordinary folk have. And that gap between the people who expect to vote for us and the people who represent them is now a gulf. It's a chasm. We have to commit ourselves to rebuilding our organic links into those communities from top to bottom. It's what I meant about building a horizontal movement rather than a vertical one. And think just finally about those 5 million calls. What a nightmare.
Thanks, John. And back out to the floor, please. Can I have, there's a man in a checked top. I can't see very well from here. And over there in the blue, and a lady here in the front. And one more from this side, and a lady at the front.
I'm a non-binary person.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So can we start there, and there, please?
I'll just read out a tweet. I've just signed this open letter to the Labour leadership candidates. I don't want Labour's policy on reproductive rights dictated by the Vatican, thanks. It's a tweet from Paul Mason during the leadership elections. Do you see a role for Catholics in this movement? And if so, would you like to apologise to them for that outrageous attack, specifically on Rebecca Long Bailey?
So when I was 12, so when I was 12, as a Catholic schoolboy, a Catholic priest committed GBH against me in front of 500 other boys. He beat me around the head with his fists and didn't stop. That's the source of. I'm a confirmed Catholic. Okay, so I have the right to say what I said. I don't want organised religion in politics. It's just as simple as that. No, some people don't like me saying that. It's simple as that.
Thank you. I was just going to say, are we not really talking about the wrong question here? I mean, we know how Labour can win. We saw not the roadmap, but we saw a roadmap, certainly in 2017. Are the pressing questions not more, will Labour win? Can Labour win? Are the problems in the Labour Party now not so existential, not so entrenched that that's simply not possible? I mean, you have Keir Starmer. He's simply not interested in bold, transformative change. He's a puppet of Labour First and other Blairite ghouls in the party, and it looks like there's no way to wrest back power from them, and never mind wresting back power from them. I mean, Paul, you said people here were deluded for their views about Keir Starmer. Are you not deluded in thinking that this man is somehow going to commit to these 10 pledges after all of this time? He's not interested in change, and I would echo the thoughts of the comrade who spoke before, that I think you really should reflect on that, because it doesn't, either you're not being honest with yourself or you're not being honest with us. This man's not interested in change. So anyway, back to the original question, and I really appreciate to hear particularly from John and Amy, can the Labour Party win? Will it win? That's what I want to know. Thank you.
We have a lady in the front here, please.
Hello, I've got a question about campaigning, and I heard a report after the 2019 general election that a door-knocking campaign can only add 6%, can only increase a 6% vote to Labour after the election. And I was wondering if we had any new methods in mind to change the way we do general election campaigning.
And one more.
I was just referring to a report that I read just after the 2019 general election that seemed to say that the campaigning that we did, the door knocking, the get out the vote campaign, only added a 6% increase to Labour's vote share.
We've got one more before we go to the panel. In the front here, in checked shirt.
All right, this is not a question, this is an answer, and I will make it brief. Right, I am working class, disabled, non-binary, and absolutely sick and tired of the Westminster elite, including Keith and his cronies, trotting all over us, spewing out lie after goddamn lie, breaking promises, and acting like he gives zero. Right. The North-South divide absolutely exists, and the Labour Party is only making it worse with their London-centric, transphobic, homophobic, ableist, and downright dangerous and hideous politics. Labour is dead, and there's no way it's going to win anytime soon until pigs can fly and aliens have made contact with Scousers. So the only way we can mobilise the left is if we get together to join a new democratic socialist party, such as the Northern Independence Party. Thank you.
We've got loads more time for questions, but I'm just going to let Amy.
Okay, just trying to think of how to draw all that together. Because actually, it was funny when I was thinking about what I was going to say. I've been sitting in that hall, since Saturday, getting a bit fed up, losing all the rule changes and all of that. And I felt like my opening comment was going to be, I'm sick of this. But that is not the way forward, is it? We all get fed up. And I totally understand how this person at the front feels. I totally understand. But just kind of twisting the first question of can Labour win, right now, that's the only option that we've got. There is no other vehicle. That's why it's so important that it reflects our values, that it reflects the policies that we want, because we haven't got any other options. So for me, it's not really even an option to discuss whether or not it can or it will. We've got to fight for it, and we need a Labour government. And this particular Labour leadership, I know we are all in this room not exactly happy with, but it's the only thing we have at the moment. So we've just got to remain focused, and we have to keep fighting. And it's always, my friend Ian Lavery says, whenever we all get down, they don't call it the struggle for nothing. So we've just got to keep going. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was the lady was asking about which methods of campaigning. And I wanted to revisit what Jon was saying about community organising. The only way we are, and actually a lot of what Paul was saying about how do you change the tide in some of these communities where Labour are just completely hated now, not trusted, hated, everyone's very suspicious, and that is community organising. And it's what actually Jeremy brought in. Sasha was leading on it in the Labour Party, and it is talking to people in communities about the issue that matters, the issues that matter to them, and then actually fighting for them on those issues. If you fight for people and win, then they will trust you and think that you are on their side. It's exactly the same model of organising as we use in trade unions, in Unite. You do a survey of the workplace, you find out what the big problems are, you have a fight about it, and you win, and people start to trust the union, you build your membership, you get stronger. It's exactly the same approach that we need in the Labour Party to rebuild that trust. And our new General Secretary, Sharon Graham, has said exactly that. Yeah. Shout out to the first female General Secretary of Unite. She has said exactly that. We need to be part of the fabric of our communities. This is the only way we're ever going to rebuild. We're ever going to rebuild trust and rebuild those, like I was trying to talk about before, the link between being a trade union member and also a Labour Party voter. That's the only way is by winning for these people. And unfortunately, the Labour Party didn't see it like that, and they dissolved the community organising unit, which, by the way, was not only very clearly a left-wing group of staff, but also the most diverse group of staff in the whole of the Labour Party, and they got rid of them. So I don't know how to make them see sense, but that's what they need to do.
There was a reason I got rid of them.
Well, let me just remind myself and perhaps some of you who were awake at the time that in 2017, well, let me start somewhere else. In February 2017, I was the national campaign organiser for Jeremy Corbyn, and I presented a paper, a strategy paper for the election, and I showed a route through to 40%. Normally, 40% you would be on the verge or actually in government. And what it did was it focused on the issues of class, but also all the other liberation groups in our society. And it showed a way forward how to transform our country and to begin to build a better society. Now, that was in February. We didn't really expect an election that year, but it came. By then, Ian had taken over with Andrew Gwynn and was chair of the party, but I was part of the election committee. We heard the election being called. We looked at the polls. We were at 26 points. We woke up the next morning and we were then at 25 points. But we finished up at 40 points, exactly the point where I thought we could get to, by looking at the various different groups in our society, and there are many of them, geographically organised, socially organised, economically, groups about sexuality or race, as I said earlier, all of those things. And within a week, further week, I think we may well have won that election. We were only a few thousand votes away. It's hard you can't rewrite history, though we lost. But it was the largest increase since the war in the Labour vote. And therefore, I am not a pessimist about the possibilities for change. But it requires two things. One is, like I've just said, a new movement, which we have to build. It's no use waiting for our leadership, because he's got into the habits of command and control. And a story about Britain which suggests that only radical change, rooted in the communities which we want to represent, which can deliver the kind of society which all of those people need. So, remember Gramsci, be a little bit pessimistic in your brains, but retain your optimism of our spirit, because we can win this, but only if we get stuck in. In fact, maybe one final point. I've always said this, but it applies particularly at the moment. I've always said something which I believe in. Put not thy faith in leaders. Build a movement. That's the way forward.
Yes.
Can I just say something about get out the vote? I think we didn't spend enough time after 2019 assessing the lessons of the very good Get Out the Vote campaign that we did. But I'm afraid some of them are negative. Well, when we were, take the example of Northfield, people in that room were saying to me, the vote doesn't exist. That's the problem. We're using a method that is identify who voted Labour before, and then you go and knock them up, and you ignore everybody else, and that, you don't argue with people. That's the first thing you ever told as an 18-year-old Labour campaigner. And so I think that here's the really galling thing. Unfortunately, that's how the alliance between Biden and Bernie and AOC actually won, was through GOTV. They said there is a vote, it's black people in cities, it's Hispanics, it's working class and young people, and it's always been democratic, and we can mobilize them against Trump. Well, I think we have to do something different. We have to find ways of finding and arguing with people and building a local alliance. Now, this example I'm going to give is not a perfect example because of the obvious problem, but it was Batley. Batley, we lost probably 4/5 of our Muslim vote needlessly over our positions. And when you were talking to people, it wasn't just Palestine, or even sometimes mainly Palestine. Sometimes it was not going to the iftar meal that Keir didn't do. Ridiculous gesture. Yeah, but we did build quite a new alliance of other kinds of working class people, and we did it because Kim Leadbeater sounds ordinary, is ordinary. However, it's not, you say white. No, the point is she's working class. And what did she do? She did campaign on issues that people around her thought were important. And she was an out lesbian, and she was able to actually I just think if we could bottle that, it's not the only way of doing it, the way you do it, the way I would do it in where I come from, Vauxhall. There's lots of different ways of doing it, but if we can bottle the idea of authenticity and relevance to people, we'll create a vote. But I'm afraid to the Labour traditionalists, GOTV is not the answer anymore, even if you do it well like you did and the others that did.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, back out to the floor, please. I'm going to go with the lady right at the back with the leopard print bandana, I think. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth row. Yep, that one. And I'm going to move over the people around. Oh, wait. I can see. I'm just trying, I'm going to look out for another woman to balance everything out first. Oh, there. Right there. Green, top in the middle and at the front. I'll come back round.
Okay, I mean, I want to, coming back on something that Ian was saying, which, Jon was saying about communities, and also the comrade at the front who talked about the North-South divide. See, I live in London. I know I've got a Manchester accent. I live in London and I'm a teacher. And what I see in my community is poverty like I've never seen before. So it's simply not true that the South has got it all, that London's got it all. And I think it's just an observation, right? But the big point, I think, is that people in London equally are disenfranchised from Labour. Why? Hackney Labour Council gentrifies places, builds thousands of houses that no one can afford. Teachers, education workers are living 3 to 4, sharing an accommodation in their 30s as if they're students. Children in Hackney witnessed parents dying in COVID. We had teachers losing parents in COVID. Why? Because houses of multiple occupation is the prevalent reason at one point why people were dying. So what we're facing is a massive housing crisis, a massive crisis in terms of employment, homelessness on the rise, and so on. And the trouble is, it's the Labour councils who are implementing the cuts, because obviously it's the Tories who dish that dirt down. But the response has to be more creative, I think. Communities. So I'm in a campaign called MOPS, which is the Morning Lane People Space, and the idea there is the council has purchased land. We're campaigning that council have to build council houses on that land. At the moment, a developer has been given permission. We want to take back that control. We want the councils to represent the people who voted them in, and I think that's the way Labour will gain traction, firstly in the councils and then broader in terms of government. And that bridges that gap that Jon was talking about, the MPs seemingly elite. It will change if we do that.
Yeah, hi. Actually, this point really follows on from that. That covers a lot of what I wanted to say. I actually live in Birmingham, and I hear what you were saying, Paul, about the attitude in Northfield and the attitude towards the sitting MP in Northfield. And I'm just kind of applying that really to ideas about community organising in Birmingham. I'm involved with Acorn in Birmingham, and in terms of community organising, one of the main bodies, I guess, that the community is organising against is the City Council as a social landlord. And again, really echoing those points that there's been huge investment in, if you come to Birmingham, the city centre is looking gleaming and pristine, but go out to King's Standing, go out to Druids Heath, huge amounts of deprivation. And it's the Labour administration in Birmingham City Council is demonstrably not meeting the needs of communities in Birmingham. And it's what do we do? What do we do about that? How do we address these right-wing, Labour-controlled administrations that aren't meeting our community's needs? How do we challenge them? And how do we actually get the message across that actually it does make a difference to vote for the Labour Party.
Thank you. We have in the middle row.
Thank you. So I've got three points, three questions. My first point is that I've increasingly come to the view that the only way we are going to get any progressive governments such as Labour, well, not particularly progressive at the moment, the Labour Party in power is electoral reform. So I would like to know what the panel's view is on PR, which I think is the only way to moving forward for Labour. My second point is to Paul. Paul, I want you to give me your honest, genuine view of what you think about people who are, just this week at conference, members being auto-excluded, suspended, expelled for, spurious reasons for attending a Zoom meeting, for goodness sake, for a prescribed group months ago. And told that they can't attend conference, and these people are the majority. Well, I would say all of them are on the left of the party. So Keir Starmer is doing nothing to unify the party and to make us election ready. He's just simply dividing us. And a question for Jon is, how on earth has Boris Johnson managed to persuade working class communities that he is a man of the people, that he is their friend, that he's an old Etonian? That's some clever trick. That's something that we've got to tackle.
So we've got one more before we go back to the panel. At the front, please. Right at the front.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank Amy. You're the political director of my union. So I'm a member of Unite Community. The reason I'm a member of Unite Community is because I'm on 0-hour contracts all the time. I'm in and out of temporary work. One of the reasons why I've probably come across as being quite angry in this meeting is a combination of things, but it is mostly because of my precarious existence. And I'm sure that, so many comrades in this room share that. The working class, it's always been divided. There's always been racists in the working class. I've come across them. I mean, I've worked on the warehouse floor, and I've, at times got into physical altercations with fellow workers because they're slagging off Polish people and saying that, Polish people shouldn't be here. And I always say to them, I've got more in common with my Polish co-worker than I do an English aristocrat. The only thing I've got in common with an English aristocrat is they're born on the same piece of rock as me. I've got nothing in common with them. I've got everything in common with fellow workers. And, Jeremy Corbyn showed in the 2017 general election that you didn't have to pander to that. You didn't have to pander to racism. He won back 20, 30% of working class voters who voted for UKIP. He didn't do that by advocating for a hostile environment. He didn't do that by, like Paul did, talk about Muslim voters, didn't vote for Labour because they're homophobic. That's why I mentioned that when you said about Kim Leadbeater, I said white, because, there was a really nasty campaign in the Batley and Spen where the senior Labour leadership were saying that Muslim voters aren't voting for us. Working class Muslim voters aren't working for us because they're homophobic or because they're anti-Semitic, with no evidence of that whatsoever, given that they'd actually voted for Labour year after year after year. They were just put off for voting for Labour because, like many working class people in this country, they look at the man who's leading the Labour Party and they don't see him fighting for working class people, right? That's it. It's nothing to do with homophobia, nothing to do with anti-Semitism. So, I'm, as somebody who works on the shop floor, as a trade unionist, it starts there. You start having those arguments on the shop floor. You start having those arguments on the street, in the pub. I've persuaded people. I'm sure lots of other people could persuade other people too. I'm not saying that there's anything special about me. But you talk it out. You debate with working class people. You know, you say it isn't the fault of the migrant. It's the fault of the bosses. That's how you do it. Yeah. That's not what's coming from this Labour leadership, and it won't come from this Labour leadership, because Paul was talking about advancing a plebeian politics. What? Led by a guy who's a knight of the realm, who was knighted for his for being the director of public prosecutions of a racist and classist justice system. I come from one of the most multicultural and poorest boroughs in London. And I agree with you, sister. You know, there is a lot of poverty in the north. There's also a lot of poverty in London. I don't play that Tory divide and rule game of saying, oh, you know, deprived people in the north of England, posh people in the south. You know that. I come from that borough, and that's where you start. You start on the ground, and you don't divide and rule. And that's what Jeremy didn't do, and that's how we're going to win.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, I'm going to let Amy respond first.
Thank you. So I'll start with the last first. And I can feel the anger coming off of you. And a lot of people are in that position. A lot of people feel that anger. A lot of people feel that despair. And that is what... Well, that meant a lot of other people. But there are people who feel angry and despair, hopeless, all those different emotions. And Keir Starmer has to channel that. He has to make people understand that he feels what they feel. He at least understands how they feel, which currently does not seem particularly forthcoming. But I just wanted to go address a couple of the points that were raised. So I think the first person that spoke was talking about Labour councils implementing cuts. We know how this works. The government restricts the budget, then the Labour councils deliver it, and then the Tories attack the Labour councils for cutting public services. And I understand it's difficult for Labour councillors. I understand they cannot deliver an illegal budget. However, they can kick up a stink, and they don't do that enough. And if you think, I can just point to two examples where the budget went through, but the Labour Party showed where it stood. The first was Matt Kerr, who is a Scottish Labour councillor in Glasgow. He walked out of the budget in protest at what a joke it was. And he made a stand. Now, he didn't make a difference, but he made a stand, and everybody knew where he stood on that budget. And the second person was Andy Burnham. When we were going into whatever lockdown it was, the North was not, or rather Manchester was not getting any more support, and he stood up and made a massive stink about the fact they were not getting the financial support they needed to sustain them through what for Manchester had been a much longer lockdown than for a lot of other parts of the country, especially London. And yes, he didn't actually manage to make a difference, but everybody knew where he stood and that he was fighting for them. And that is what they need to do more of. Make it clear that they do not want to deliver these things. Make it clear that they are against it. Be creative. I think the lady who raised this, sorry, I can't see you, but yes, be creative. Take a bloody stand. And tell people, you know, what you're doing to stick up for them. And the other thing that I just wanted to touch on was your point about how some of your colleagues were talking about Polish workers. And obviously within trade unions, this is an issue that affects a lot of our members. We have people working in, for example, food manufacturing, where you have a lot of people from different places. And Len McCluskey always had a really good position, in my view, on how we deal with this, the racism that builds up. If you put a system in place where people cannot exploit cheaper labour, then people don't feel like people are being brought in to work for less wages and worse terms and conditions than they are. Yes. So it's quite simple. Don't let bosses exploit. Because then you do get undercutting. And that's not the people who come and do those jobs, by the way. It's the bosses that are doing it. And that is where you have trade union activity, organisation, trade union strength that can actually make a massive difference on the shop floor. And you are completely right. You know, you have more in common with your Polish co-workers than you do the big the big boss who's exploiting everybody, not just the Polish people. Thank you.
It's not Labour councils. I mean, in London, where there's a huge opportunity for speculators, it's not that they just, won't build council houses. They're knocking them down. I mean, it's sometimes I just can't. And there's nothing there really to do with the precept or the law. It's just the fact that a lot of them are just bought and sold by speculators. No, we have to co-inhabit this party with them. And it's not a new thing. I mean, I understand why there's so much frustration in the audience, but that's not a new thing. That's been going on for 100 years. People don't like Liberals. There's plenty of Liberals in the Labour Party. There's plenty of people who've broken strikes. One famous MP was part of the electricians' union that broke the strike. And there's war criminals, and still in there. This is what don't have any illusions about what this party is. It's a very, very inadequate vehicle for working class political expression. And it may come. I say this as someone who would probably be the last person out, but it may come. If we get PR, as somebody asked, and I am in favour of PR, I don't want to be in a list drawn up by David Evans, because I know where I'll be on it, at the bottom. It may come to there's a realignment. That comes with swings and roundabouts, but that's not for now. For now, all we've got is Labour. And on that note, I want to say just two final things. First of all, I'm on record of totally opposing all the expulsions and prescriptions and auto-exclusions. And what I would advocate we do is that there is a legal fund. Unfortunately, it's the legal fund that Chris Williamson set up, which, I'm not a supporter of Chris Williamson. But I think we do need a legal approach to this and to reset Labour's... So, how can it float natural justice again and again against people who are paying money to it? So we need some kind of a legal fight against Labour. It's along the same lines as many, the Unite 5 and the rest are fighting the HQ. There's an opportunity for those of us who want to push this party to the left. And it's left open to us by something I can never understand. Labour HQ will not nominate PPCs. You notice this? There are no PPCs for all the places we lost. Because the argument is, I don't know what the formal argument is, I mean, you've worked there, maybe this is true, that you can't really do it if there's a boundary commission review. So, but I don't understand. But when we do nominate the PPCs, we don't need any trigger ballots. We just need the members, and if we can get as many people back who've left, I think there's a chance of getting, a lot. Because remember, we need to win something like 100 extra MPs. The next battle for us, to even form a government, the next battle is to make sure as many of those 100 are people like you. And by the way, I'll just say this finally. Yes, there'll be people having a go at me in this meeting, and people rightly asking me, account for this, account for that. That's what the Soviet will be like. That's what your local people's assembly will be like when there's a mass struggle. That's what Labour conference should be like. We thrive on these differences and differences of opinion. None of them should be out. I want more. In a way, the big other missing thing, I'll finish on this, is, and it's so difficult to pull off, is to allow the people who come straight from those estates, John, or straight from a fight against their council estate being knocked down, or straight from, your workplace that you're talking about, and they're not coming with the language that we have. And some people might find the language and the attitude they have very difficult to tolerate. But we in the Labour movement have been doing that for 100 years, taking people who are very, very difficult to deal with and inspiring them to, and almost like directing their lives along a more constructive path. That's the thing. When we did it right in the 80s, well, I was in the, I was one of the people Neil Kinnock wanted to kick out. That's what we were doing. We had mass, LPYS events. We were pulling people in who one minute actually were racists, and the next minute they were there. So we must understand that working class people can be transformed in struggle, and that nobody is de facto excluded unless they're a fascist, from that process of trying to find their role in society through collective organisation.
Well, look, I think it's all been said more or less. There's not much I can add to the comments which have been made. I want to tell you a story and then perhaps finish with a point. One day, I goes into the local Tesco's near my office to buy a couple of things for the office. And a bloke who's clearly employee of Tesco says, "Can I talk to you, John? I know you're an MP. Is it okay if I talk to you?" I said, "Of course it is." He says, "Well," he said, "I'd been working late night shifts to filling shelves." And he says, one morning, 1:30 in the morning, he said, "I got beaten up badly by a group of drunken women. And I ended up in hospital. And when I came out," he said, "I thought, well, what I've got to do." So I joined the union. And he said, "We're going to have a day on Saturday of respect the shop workers. So would you come?" I said, I don't know if I dare ask you, but would you be prepared to come?" I says, "It's my job, I'll be there, definitely." As we talked, and I went on to Saturday, but as we talked, it became clear, because I represent 23 villages, he knew everybody in the village, he knew everything about the village, he was a strong Labour voter, he was a union guy. Everything about him told you he was one of us, should be in our movement. And I said, "Tell me," and I thought he should be a parish councillor at least and maybe make his way. So I said, "Have you ever thought about joining the Labour Party?" He always says, "I don't know if I'd be allowed." I said, "More than be allowed," I said, "join and I'll sort it out. I'll pay your subs for the first time and see what you think." Anyhow, I did the thing on Saturday and I forgot about it, but I bumped into him a few months later. "What happened? Did you join?" He said, "Yeah, I joined." He said, "I went home." He said, "I put my suit on to go to the Labour Party meeting." I mean, it's laughable, but it's tragic. He says, "I got to the local community centre. I got where the party meeting was. I got to the door," he says, "I didn't dare go in." So he said, "I turned around and went to the pub. I got back home, got changed, and went back to the pub." And I thought to myself, and I said, "For God's sake, I'll come with you next time," but he wouldn't do it. And we must not allow these divisions between our party, its institutions, the language we use, the blooming points of order, references back, minutes, matters arising, to form a wall between ourselves and the people we hope to represent. But that's what happened. And it happened in all the country. When I first, this is a long time ago now in history, when I first tried to join the Labour Party, it was in 1969. You know, I know you don't think I'm that old, but I am. And so I wrote in, "Can I join Labour Party? I'm a member of the GMB. I'm a building worker. I want to join." So I get a phone call a few days later. "Sorry, you can't join at the moment. Labour Party's full." True story. And I understand it was something that went on down the country because I've found other people who had the same experience. We can't have that. We've got to be open. We've got to build an open movement, a movement for change, a change which is from the bottom up, not from the top down, because we'll never achieve it any other way. It's got to be us, only us, the people in this room, and the people like us out in the country, breaking down the walls between ourselves, the way we talk, the way we look, the way we sound, our vocabulary, all of that stuff, and the communities we want to represent. Otherwise, I tell you this, we're not going to do it. But we can do it. And when I come to I'm a member of the National Committee of Momentum. When I come to a Momentum meetings, I feel inspired. I go away like I'm on a cloud, because look around us. We are the movement which can change Britain. We're undefeated, we're unbowed, and we've planted a flag in a piece of territory. We will defend that flag and that territory, whatever they choose to throw at us. And in defending the flag and in defending our politics, we'll inspire the movement which we need to build. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you. We've got 5 minutes before we wrap up, but there is someone in the middle row who's had her hand up for a while, and I really don't want us to leave without taking this question, because I promised. So we got one more before we go.
Okay, thank you very much, panel. Very interesting. I still feel somewhat despondent, although we went to many very good meetings. One of the things that I think is, well, I've got 2 points that one point and a question. I actually think that the leadership of the Labour Party at the present moment has no interest in making the kinds of changes that we in this room are keen on. Why? Because they're putting themselves forward as the efficient managers of capitalism. That's what the whole way in which they are addressing the media, that's what they are about. And I think it's cloud cuckoo land to imagine that somehow they're going to change. They are not. And that's the point that I want to make. The second point I want to make, and which hasn't been addressed, is I come from a Labour city, Leicester. And, you know, I'm quite proud of many of my councillors and what they've sought to do. And I'm actually more than proud, I'm sitting next to one of them. But our struggle actually isn't about the politicians, although part of it is. It's about the bloody structures and systems of the Labour Party. The enemy, and I use the term enemy, to any progress that we try to make is the regional office, the people who work. They will not support us. In fact, they ignore us. They have called for the new body that's now the government, local government body, committee, whatever it's called. They called a meeting in August when none of the constituencies can meet. This was done by the regional office. 14 days in advance. Completely against. Even if the rules haven't been written for how these meetings should take place, completely against custom and practice. It was entirely undemocratic. Where can we make a complaint? Nobody can tell us. You look on the Labour Party, the website for the Labour Party, it's impossible to contact the Labour Party. Every complaint, every issue we raise goes back to the regional office. The very people who've caused us problems, the very people who wouldn't support Claudia Webb in Leicester East. An absolute outrage, but would prefer to support Keith Vaz, who's actually going to chair a session at the Fringe meeting. It's an outrage. Who is going to deal with this?
Okay, that's quite a big last question. I know Jon has to rush off, but if either of you would like to come back to that before we close.
I wish I could tell you how to solve the problem of the Labour Party bureaucracy. It's a complete nightmare and an experience I share. I'm sure Jon shares, and there's lots of other people in this room that will have shared it. It is, I don't know if I should say this, but the people who are running the Labour Party are masters of using bureaucracy to drive through whatever they want. And all I can say is we have to get better beat them at their own game wherever we can, and get experienced and understand the games that they will play. So, for example, you know, the games happen all over the place, and I'm not making any unfounded allegations, but it does seem strange there was technical difficulties with the live stream today during the Palestine debate from the minute it started to the minute that it ended. And the debate was so short, there was 4 speakers. But this is what we are dealing with. But what I would say is, I know it is incredibly frustrating. It's infuriating, it's awful. But also, I find it, and I am the political director of the biggest affiliate, and we have the same problems that you have. But what I also think it is a huge drain on energy and our time and our resources when we basically get dragged into the same pit. So all I would try and say is, of course they're going to do that. They will keep doing that. Try not let it get you down. I know that is impossible at times, but try to ignore it and move on. Spend your time and your energy where you can win and ignore their tedious games with bureaucracy.
Very brief. I echo all of that. Very briefly, I try and spend as little time as possible enmeshed in these games that they play with us. But what I've learned from, I had a bit to do with the Hong Kong protester movement, and went there and spoke with them. And you know, they face a similar but not exactly the same problem. You know, a bureaucracy, an unlawful system, a very difficult thing to deal with. And they had this slogan, "Be water." The "Be water" slogan means you flow around the obstacle. And what does that mean for us? I think you can't, yes, it's still an unjust obstacle, but if there was a Leicester campaign for whatever it's going to be, better council housing, or about something that was not affiliated to the Labour Party, that people from across all constituencies, all parties, all communities could come to, and then it started to do things that the region can't stop you doing. I only think that's our only. That's our version of be water. Create structures, take ground that they can't move fast enough to do. But like Amy says, I think on the big issues, we have to be good at fighting them. And I'd reiterate what I'd say. We need to look at a legal solution of putting the party under law, so that you can, if they break their promise to us who pay the bills, we can have a legal redress. That's what's missing at the moment.
Okay, thank you so much to our panel, Amy, Paul and John. We put this festival together on volunteer power and on very, very little, so please, 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 if you can, go to our website and become a supporter. We'd so appreciate it.